But last year we launched our Women's Project, and so my outline for today's talk is to explain why we did that, what some of the things that we've learned so far in our project have been. We're still very young, we're still learning, we're still asking more questions than we are giving answers. I'm going to tell you about some of the cases that inspired the project. And then I'm going to bring Nicole up, and we're going to have a conversation together about her case in particular. And I should have no problem ending in time to have a nice Q&A session at the end. So we started thinking about the Women's Project back in the year 2010. And at that time, four of the clients that the center had represented in litigation since its founding, and we're coming up on our 15th year anniversary, I might add. Four of our clients had been women. And their pictures are up there, and for whatever reason, I just started thinking about some of the similarities in these cases, and they really are striking. Two of these cases were cases that I worked on in the proceedings leading up to their exonerations, and that would be the two women on the bottom, Julie on the left and Christine on the right. But all four of these cases shared some particular characteristics. All of these women were moms who had been convicted of killing a child, their child. They were all loving moms. They were none of them the type of person that you or anyone would expect would be accused of any crime, much less killing their own children. They were not child abusers. They didn't have criminal backgrounds. They didn't have mental health histories. There were no motive. There was not, in any of the cases, there was not a motive for them to have killed their child. And yet they were all found guilty and convicted. And in each and every case, these moms had been investigated by the police while they were still grieving the loss of their child. You can imagine that. You can imagine your child dying either accidentally or at the hands of someone else, and you're talking to the police and you're trying to help them, and suddenly their investigation turns on you. Now you're the target. And that happened to each of these women, and as a result of that, in each case, the statements of the women were used as part of the prosecution's case against them. In none of the men's cases that I worked on, or that anyone in my center had been worked on in the time I was there, none of the men's cases fit this profile, but all the women's cases did. And I realized that not all women's wrongful conviction cases fit this pattern, but something was speaking to me. Something was telling me, we need to look at why this is so. We really need to look at women's cases and see whether they should be viewed through a different lens or a special lens as opposed to men's cases. And so that was, I'd say, half of what got us started. And the other half was that my client, Julie Ray Harper, who is here in the lower left-hand corner, she was exonerated in 2006. And 4 years later, she had a really hard time getting through what happened to her. I'll tell you a little bit more about her. But 4 years later, she decided that she felt strong enough to attend the annual Innocence Network conference that takes place every year at different places around the country, where the people who work on innocence cases, members of innocence clinics, students, exonerated people, other professionals come together and talk about these issues. And she decided to attend the conference that year. And when she got there, she found herself among the exonerees, which is what we call people who've been convicted and then their convictions have been overturned because they're innocent. She found herself in a sea of men. There were a total of 5 women exonerees at that conference. And they found each other, and they got to talking, and they said, we have some issues that are in common. We have some needs to network with each other that we think merits having our own thing, whatever it is, our own project. And Julie came to me and asked me if Northwestern would start such a project. And I didn't say no to that. So those two factors put together is what made us decide to start the Women's Project and start asking the questions that I laid out for you. So what I want you to think about as I'm talking is whether you think women's wrongful convictions are different or not. And I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. To honor the women that have inspired the project and continue to inspire me, Nicole among them, every day. I want to just tell you briefly about their cases. Nicole's will save for later, but she'll be here. But I want to tell you about my other clients' cases. Tabitha Pollock, up in the upper left-hand corner, was a resident of Central Illinois, and she was, at the time that she was charged with murdering her 3-year-old daughter, Jamie Sue, she was living with her boyfriend, who was the father of an infant. She and he were parents of an infant, and she had 2 other kids, including her daughter, Jamie Sue. They were living in his parents' home. It's a good family environment. One night, while Tabitha was asleep, her boyfriend, Scott English, murdered her daughter, Jamie Sue. Tabitha was asleep, and nobody ever disputed that. When she found out what had happened, you can imagine, she was horrified, she was distraught, and she helped the police in their investigation of Scott English, the murderer. And as she began talking to the police, she said, I never ever imagined that he would do this thing. But as she started to think about it, she said, and she said this unfortunately out loud to the police, you know, a couple weeks ago, Jamie Sue had a bruise, and I didn't think anything of it, and last month she fell down the stairs, and I thought it was a fall, but maybe Scott pushed her. And these ruminations eventually led to not only Scott English being charged with first-degree murder, but Tabitha was charged and convicted of first-degree murder. And the state's theory was that Tabitha knew, or at least should have known, that her boyfriend Scott was a danger to their child, or her child, that was his stepdaughter. And she spent 6 years in prison before the Illinois Supreme Court looked at her case at the able advocacy, or as a result of the able advocacy of my colleague Jean Rayleigh, and said there's absolutely no evidence anywhere that Tabitha knew this boyfriend presented a threat to her child. And in Illinois and nowhere else do we convict people because, gee, a mom magically should have known that someone was a danger. And so she was let go. But not before her youngest child was placed in adoption, and she has no further contact with him to this day. And her oldest child grew up without his mom. So that's Tabitha's case. Julie Ray Harper lived in downstate Illinois. She was a divorced mom. She shared custody of her 10-year-old son with her ex-husband and his wife. And what happened to her in 1998 was that when her son lived with her, they shared a small home in a little community outside of a teeny tiny town called Lawrenceville. And one night while she was sleeping, she heard a noise. She woke up, she got up from her bed, she looked across the hall in her son's bedroom, but she didn't see him in his bed. And that freaked her out, and she went out in the hall, and basically she was bowled over by a stranger in her house who attacked her, and she in turn was trying to get at him because she in her mind was thinking that somehow the disappearance of her son had something to do with this guy that she didn't know who was in her house in the middle of the night. He got away, she ran to the neighbors for help. The police arrived, and horribly, when they went in the house, they found that, in fact, Joel was in his room. He'd been stabbed to death, and his little body had rolled off the bed behind the bed, so she had been able to see it when she looked in his bedroom, and that's why she thought he was gone. The police didn't find the intruder, and so they decided that Julie had killed her own son. And she was charged with murder. She was, I won't go through all the ins and outs of the case, but again, if you can imagine the horror of her ordeal. And she was convicted. Fortunately, her conviction was overturned on appeal. My office and a law firm called Schiff Hardin in Chicago represented her, and we were able in the second trial to show scientifically that there definitely was another person in the home, that the many, many injuries on Julie's body that the prosecutors said were self-inflicted such as a black eye and scrapes and rug burns all over her that had resulted from the struggle with this guy, we were able to show that they were not in fact self-inflicted, and she was acquitted. And then lastly, other than, as I said, Nicole, who you'll hear from herself, Christine Bunch, lived in Indiana. In the mid-90s, she shared a trailer home with her son. He was 3. She woke up one night and the trailer was on fire.